So there are some cultural Marxist strands as well now. Um, Systemic racism, white privilege, patriarchy. These are cultural Marxist ideas, but they only work because they resonate with a much larger group of um, left liberals who are motivated by, guilt, alarmism, and empathy towards these minority groups. And I put more emphasis on that process of liberal humanitarianism, which, by the way, also goes and influences psychotherapy, and starting in the early 60s with Carl Rogers. And so we get this humanistic psychotherapy, and that's where these ideas around self-esteem, emotional safety, trauma, emotional bullying, and all these sorts of things come from. And that's where a lot of the speech code philosophy comes from, and this clamping down on free speech is through this humanistic psychotherapy, fragility, snowflake type of ideology. And so that's all this humanistic therapeutic ideology is not a Marxist. It doesn't have a Marxist root. And that's kind of why I sort of emphasize a lot in the book that, yes, there's no question that cultural Marxists do want to replicate themselves, do have a certain amount of power in universities and in arts councils and in other places. But they would get nowhere without the support of that big chunk of well-meaning left liberals. Why did a majority of Seattle citizens support defund the police? Is it because they want to overthrow the capitalist order and the family? No, it's basically because they were suckered in by the appeal to this kind of be kind philosophy, and so they went along with some really radical stuff. And I think we have to understand that liberal humanitarian substrate. That's why the soil is so fertile. And it's kind of anchored, all of this is anchored not in logic and in principles and in high intellectual ideas like postmodernism, but in stories about Jim Crow and slavery and the Holocaust. And it's all about stories of the good and the goodies and the baddies. And the cultural left has won the battle for hearts. It doesn't do well on a debate stage because it doesn't deal in fact and logic, but it does very well with meaning making, with movies, with books, with memes, and all sorts of sort of emotional things. And that's really the big driver here, is those sort of left liberal emotions, focusing on guilt, focusing on empathy, focusing on fear.
I think hence the cancellations. Like the part of the reason why these ideologies cancel people so readily is because there are no debates there. When there are debates, you can very clearly see that they are at the losing side very, very quickly. And I think that's the reason why they keep going for the professors, for example, or, educated elites, is because these are the people that are able to dismantle their arguments. But what I'm starting to see is that the cancellation, however horrible it is, it's not successful as it maybe was 20 years ago. I mean, look at you. You were essentially cancelled. You went through a bit of the mobbing. Arguably, you are probably doing better off now than where you were 5 years ago. Not that you would voluntarily go through that, but I see the rise of the new media and this alternative information universe to BBC and ITV News. It makes the cancellation a little bit less successful and efficient as it used to be.
Well, yeah, I think when you say I wouldn't say 20 years ago. I would say the peak of cancel culture was around 2020, 2021. So in the last 3 years, it's harder to cancel people now. Why is that? Now, if you look in Britain, for example, where, I had this experience when I was critical of the social justice movement, so-called social justice movement. I got a lot of attacks from the radical students and staff who tried to gin up these Twitter mobs, and I had quite a few internal investigations prompted by these radicals. What I would say is that the press, in certainly in Britain, it is quite difficult to find, even at the Guardian, actually, um, people who favor cancel culture. It's almost unheard of in the press. There are some, but very few will defend this practice. And so the radicals inside the institutions are relatively isolated from public opinion. And so what they kind of hope is that they can just operate in their little bubble with their social media acolytes and weaponizing the processes and procedures of universities. And of course, this is another aspect of it. Why this left liberal humanitarian thing is so important is those people have created the workplace policies, the HR policies inside organizations, which the radicals can then weaponize. This idea that, well, you have to be respectful, you have to sort of be inclusive, you have all of these sort of woolly, mushy words and you're always kind of respecting the subjective feelings of hurt of whoever claims to be hurt, and so this kind of, they're able to weaponize those policies. Now, what I would say about people being canceled is, I was able to survive it. Although I think it definitely is extremely sort of nerve-wracking when you get that email saying you have to report to this is such and such a place. There's been a complaint put in against you. I mean, that's pretty powerful, and especially if you fear for your job. And in academia, if you lose your job, you're not getting back in. It's 150 applications for every post. Certainly not anywhere you want to work. So it's a very powerful, chilling effect that these accusations have. And now there have been some bodies like the Free Speech Union that has popped up, which has, done an excellent job. The main academic unions are completely woke in Britain, and they are on the side of your employer if there's any kind of a challenge to you over speech issues. So they are 100% useless. But what I should say is there are a number of people who don't have a public profile. Like I had a Twitter profile and I'd written in the press. If you don't have a profile, it's a bit like escape velocity, that if you shoot something out into space, if you get past a certain point, the Earth's gravity will slingshot you up into the stratosphere. If, however, you don't have enough escape velocity, you'll just fall back to Earth. And so there are many casualties who just either decided to shut up, or they were punished in different ways by getting worse teaching and research, or they were fired. A number of people you never heard of were just fired. So I would say that for the vast majority of dissenting academics, it's an effective strategy to shut them up or punish them. And so I wouldn't conclude from the few people who do actually manage to profit from, or at least to do well by telling their war stories. I don't think that's representative of the entire phenomenon. So I wouldn't want to lose sight of the fact that on balance, cancel culture is effective in shutting people up and disciplining people. It takes a huge toll. I mean, the share of conservative academics who say they self-censor is around 3/4 in the English-speaking countries. So it's an enormously powerful silencer, really, of opinion.
I definitely wanted to cover that because I see that being used as defense of the cancellation culture and saying the cancellation culture is just the healthy debate, which clearly it isn't. But it was brought on a few times in the sort of the mainstream media coverage and certain debates that were had. And like you say, just because you've got few bit more well-known names that managed to survive and actually do better, it gave them even more of the platform, I suppose. It gave them the PR that that they didn't have before, perhaps. But a guy from ASDA that is lost his job because he liked a post on Facebook about something that that guy didn't get publicity. We know about the story, but we don't know his name. We don't know which ASDA it was. That you really need to have that that public work behind you. I think Douglas Murray put it really nicely, because they went after him recently quite ferociously. And he said that, it's very easy for him to weather it because he's got like 7 books behind him, thousands of articles. It's like you go through that and try and cancel him because he's got so much public appearance in terms of people know who he is.
Right. And if you're if you're not dependent on your institution as well, I mean, J.K. Rowling is uncancelable because she's wealthy and she has her own brand. She's not beholden to it. Now, her publishers can drop her, but then probably some publisher is going to go for her because they know they're going to do very well. But yeah, so I think this is one of the games the left, it just refuses. The way the cultural left operates is it will essentially deny there's a problem until the evidence is so overwhelming, and then they'll just suddenly pretend they never denied there was a problem. And so it's quite interesting to see how it operates. It's like on the gender trans issue. Suddenly now the Labour Party in Britain is accepting the Cass review. Things that they accept now, which they would have called a right-wing plot a number of years ago. And they just memory hold the fact that they were foursquare against this stuff a number of years back and said trans women are women and that's it, no debate. All of this is suddenly, they pretend they didn't say it. I mean, and we're having this debate, of course, now in the U.S. election. Kamala Harris, who obviously was in favor of defund the police and is now trying to pretend that just never happened. Now, of course, on the debate stage, that's going to be thrust in her face, and that's a different story. But I just think but when it comes to kind of intellectuals, they will just, they won't actually change. If they change their minds, they'll suddenly pretend they never held different views. And the strategy for dealing with challenges, from those who are critical of the social justice movement is to just ignore. So they don't engage, they just simply ignore. So my book, for example, no one on the cultural left is going to review that. It's just radio silence. Like, okay, I'd be because I would be interested to get a hostile review from somebody to say, okay, we think the evidence is weak here, and this is our counter evidence, and this argument does, the conclusions don't flow from the premises, whatever. I would love to have some constructive engagement of that kind from the left. They just will not touch any of these books. They just pretend they don't exist. That's their argument.
Putting a review for your book taboo would imply that they've read the book, and even that would be probably enough to get them cancelled between their, in their social circle.